All right, thanks so much. We're going to get started. We have a program that's probably going to take us about an hour and 20 minutes, so we want to start on time. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Beth Clark. I'm the Development and Program Director at the Wilderness Committee and for the past 7 years, and I'm also a member of the executive team, which for many of you might know, I sit on and sat on with Joe Foy and Gwen Barlee. And also our retired E-team member, Matt Jong, is also here tonight. So on behalf of the Wilderness Committee, our board, staff, and executive team, I just want to thank all of you on behalf of Gwen's family as well, many of which are here tonight. I really want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. The Wilderness Committee is super honored to host this event and to honor Gwen, our colleague of 16 years. We were so lucky to have her as our National Policy Director and on our executive team. So, I'd like to start out by acknowledging the land and water that we gather upon this evening is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So thank you so much to these nations that have cared and stewarded this area that we're meeting and celebrating Gwen on this evening. I want to acknowledge the members of Gwen's family that have come out tonight. We are so thrilled to be able to spend this time with you. Gwen's mother is here, Kathleen, Kyle. Her sister Veronica is here as well. And Veronica's daughter Laura is here with us and her boyfriend. Gwen's other sister Diane resides in England and is unable to be here tonight, but we have a photographer and videographer here tonight that are documenting the event. So if you've seen them, I'm sure you've seen them, but they'll be recording the whole thing so that not only Diane, but Diane and others can be with us in a different way. Also here is Gwen's Uncle John and Aunt Marie. Her cousins, two cousins, so her cousin Alice and her husband Andre are here. And also her cousin Barry is here. So thank you so much. We also have some long-term close friends of Gwen that are here, which is super amazing for those of us at the Wilderness Committee. We didn't get to know all of you, but there's some close friends of Gwen that are here this evening and have joined us from the island. There's a lot of people also here from the South Okanagan, so that's very exciting. And a couple of them we'll hear from later this evening as well. And then of course there's all of the friends and allies of which I haven't been able to keep track, but I've seen a ton of people in here tonight from all of the areas that Gwen felt passionate about. We have some folks here from the Lyme disease community that were active with Gwen on that issue. Also folks from the Freedom of Information and Privacy area, so that's great that they could join us. Our staff and board members are a lot of them here tonight, and I really want to acknowledge that they have done a lot of work to help pull this evening off and to come. Some of them have moved vacations around or come on their vacation just to be here tonight to be with all of you. So thank you so much to everyone that's come out. We're going to start the evening off. I'd like to invite up front here Kat Norris. Kat is a very good friend of the Wilderness Committee. She'll be doing an opening prayer. Kat is from the Layakson First Nation on Vancouver Island and a spokesperson for the Indigenous Action Movement, and most notably to the Wilderness Committee. Kat is the mother of our colleague, Perry Sky Jack. So we're honored that Kat could join us this evening.
It's a beautiful day today. When we say Haichkasiam, we mean it from our heart. And I've learned to, when I wake up, my grandpa or my uncle from Musqueam, he says, If you can open your eyes in the morning, it's already a good day. So I just wanted to raise my hands up to all of you here and to the family and to my son for all of the work that you do, all of the work that you do for the environment. I see so many impassioned people, and I watch your work over the years, and my son shares with me some of the work that you guys have done, and the environment and Mother Earth and our water and everything that lives within the 4 directions, the 7 directions, meaning under the ground and in the sky, need that support. So, and my son reminded me, because I'm an activist and a spokesperson, Mom, it's not a rally, so. So I wanted to share a prayer song. And I like to share the meaning behind this song. And I have what's called lupus. And I was feeling really ill one day. And my friend, he gave me a call and he goes, well, do you have a medicine song? And I thought of powwow songs. They're really loud, like, wah! And he's like, no, it's like, do you have like a prayer song? And I'm thinking of bone games. Then all of a sudden I could hear this woman's voice. And I grew up in Los Angeles, Vancouver, Seattle, so that kind of freaked me out. And I could hear her singing. And he's like, what's wrong? And I said, I could hear someone singing. So I was afraid to look. And he goes, well, get the song. So I listened, and it kind of sounded scary, like, So I really listened, and I started humming. He said, now sing it, sing the song. So as soon as I started singing this song, I started to sweat. And he goes, now you have to get up and do something. So I got up and I started doing the dishes. So I'm sweating and crying. And I sang it to my mom. Mom, have you ever heard this song? It's about 10 o'clock. I felt much better. And it was a song that our grandmothers used to sing to the grandchildren when they were not feeling good. And I'm like, oh, wow, I thought that's so cool. So I'd like to share this song and this special moment. And we have already given thanks to the Coast Salish people of this territory. The Salish territory runs all the way down to the westernmost part of Idaho, up to Osoyoos, the Okanagan, the south side of Vancouver Island, so we have a huge territory. So very thankful to be Coast Salish. So here's the song. Take a deep breath. Breathe out. Oh. So I'd like to sing this song to the family. We've had a loss as well of our brother, my son's uncle, and on the 29th, and we have a lot of great teachings that help us, with our healing and a lot of protocol. So, and one of them we've learned is, that they're watching over us now. It's the same as many other cultures. There are guides, there are guardians, and at first it doesn't mean much, but today, it's been a few weeks now, and, I really can feel it. And I'm learning to let go. And another teaching is, for all of you here, the more when we think about them, if we feel sad, they want to be here with us. So when we think about them, feel good, feel happy, raise up your hands to them and let them know that that they're there. And that makes them feel good, makes them feel happy. So I just want to share that because we probably all have losses. So here's the song. Oh, 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 hey, hey, oh, oh, hey, hey, oh, 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 oh. And before I let you go, I want someone to say, is it a bird? Is it a bird? No! Say, is it a plane? Is it a plane? No! Oh my gosh, it's Mighty Mouse. Way Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kat. So I want to do another round of thank yous, in particular to each and every person, some that are here and some that aren't, that called our office, the family, emailed, dropped by, sent cards, the posts on social media, with your condolences about Gwen. We were really overwhelmed. I don't think we expected it to go that way, and the outpouring of sentiment, the volume of people that contacted us, the number of media stories, it was extremely moving to see so much love and admiration and respect for Gwen and her contributions. And particularly many of you that were grieving at the same time, but thought of the family, thought of the Wilderness Committee. So I just want to, on behalf of our organization, extend our thank you for all that you did. It meant more than you'll ever know. And just a couple of quick things before the tributes start. For those of you that haven't, well, a few people asked me, so we will run the slideshow again at the end, and these photos were provided by the family, by some friends and colleagues, activists in other areas. Obviously, our archives are extensive as well, so we will run the slideshow later, so you'll have a chance to see them again. The photos at the back there on my right, those are Gwen's photos that Gwen took. We had, to say hundreds would be a small amount, probably more than 1,000 photos to choose from, and we chose 12. And I find them incredibly moving, so if you haven't had a chance, please check those out. As you know, Gwen was an avid photographer. We have the guest book over here. Please, if you want to sign, you're welcome to do so over at this table here on the left. I'm like, right, left? Also, we'll be staying after the tributes, just to let you know. There's a lounge over here. There's another bar. It's open till 11. The Wilderness Committee staff will no doubt be here till 11 if you've met them. And so we'll be here listening to tributes, and also feel free to move about, to go to the patio. There's a lot of emotion in this room here tonight, and people need to take care of themselves and each other. So just to let you know the logistics. So we're going to start off the night with a challenging one, but one I know we're all looking forward to. Veronica, Gwen's sister, will start off the evening.
So I'm Gwen's older sister, and it is so hard to believe that Gwen is gone. She had such presence, such reach, and so much determination. Thank you for being here tonight as we share our stories about Gwen and honor her. For many years, when I met people, they'd say, Barlee, Barlee, hey, are you any relation to Bill Barlee? And then they'd share a nice and usually very funny story about Dad. Then about 10 years ago, people started saying, Barlee, hey, are you any relation to Gwen Barlee? And then they would share a story about Gwen, how she'd inspired them, how they'd connected with her and worked with her on a project or a cause. And there were so many great people and so many good causes. Tonight I will speak a little bit of Gwen from the family side of things, and Tom Hawthorne's July 10th article is really nice if you haven't read that in the Globe and Mail yet. So Gwen was born in Penticton. As a little baby, right until she was in her late teens, she was called by her nickname, Gwendy. When she was 4, we moved to Summerland. It's hard to believe, but she was actually very shy in kindergarten. She became a gifted public speaker, but it was something that she really worked at. Growing up in a small town in the 60s and 70s, us kids had a lot of time to play outside, unstructured and unsupervised. We were down in Zimmerman's Gulch, up Giant's Head Mountain, running around in the orchards, playing tag, hide and seek, tobogganing down the hills. No water, no snacks, no sunscreen, not even a watch, let alone a cell phone, and no worries. It was absolutely glorious. We would finally trek home when Mom started ringing the cowbell to say dinner was ready. So Mom handled the chore side of things, reading aloud and lessons. That's where Gwen learned to play tennis, skate, and swim. Dad handled the gold panning, treasure hunting, card playing, ghost town, and backcountry side of things, along with a lot of BC history and storytelling. Being a kid outdoors is where Gwen got her deep love of the Okanagan and that connection to the natural world. Family dinners were a hotbed of discussion based on strong principles of social justice, environmentalism, and always progressive politics. Mom added women's lib into the mix in the early 70s, and Dad finally got dragged into the 20th century despite his best efforts to hang out in the 19th. Feminism remained a strong influence for Gwen. She later completed a double major in poli-sci and women's studies. Just before Gwen graduated or started grade 11, our family moved to Vancouver so Mom could finish university at UBC. Gwen and her younger sister Diane both went to high school at U Hill, where they made a strong group of lifelong friends. Gwen loved art and was constantly drawing and painting. Her artistic side translated itself into a lifelong love of photography, and more naturally, I'm not even sure I need to say this, she was very, very competitive. There were many, and I tell you, many intense Instagram contests with Diane or her niece Laura about who had the very best collection of family dinner photos and what exactly was the best way to judge those photos. She was so much fun and such a tireless advocate for environmentalism, the Wilderness Committee, Lyme disease, and FOI, among other things, and there's so many things. I'm really going to miss our detailed, okay, true confession, slightly obsessive policy wonk to conversations about Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn, and progressive politics in BC, Canada, and the world. I so much wish she could have seen John Horgan elected as premier and George Heyman as environment minister. It has been a very long 16 years in this province. I could say so much more, but I'm at my limit. As we remember Gwen tonight, I know she would want us to continue working together to make a difference. Every action counts. And to have a good laugh while we acknowledge that she was the undisputed Boggle champion. Thank you.
If someone finds Courtney from the rowing club around there, we can ask her a little question. If anyone from the staff has seen her, just ask her to come up. I was just going to say that Veronica's a bigger person than me because I refuse to acknowledge Gwen as the undisputed winner of hearts. That is never going to happen. We played a pretty good round of hearts last week in honor of Gwen, let me tell you. Anyway. Well, it wasn't Gwen, so there you go. Finally. Next, I'd like to invite up Constance, her roommate from North Bend. Hi, Constance, come on up. She lived with Gwen and was a friend of Gwen's for 11 years, so thank you. Excellent.
Test. Is that okay? I have to admit I have an accent. Interrupt me if it's not, if people can't hear me. Okay. I'm gonna read it, so maybe I can look in the crowd. Dearest Gwen, I frequently imagine you being away on a field trip or visiting your mom in Victoria. But the reality is that I will never hear you again on the front steps entering our house. Home isn't home anymore, but rather a place that's empty and cold. You wanted to live, to address incorrect policies, to conduct research and raise questions that would ultimately make the world a better place. You were proactive and provided environmentally related messages to the general public to raise awareness about topics that truly matter to you and others. After a day of intense work as an activist, you would recharge your batteries by withdrawing with a cup of tea, nibbles, and a laptop. Know that Gwen was a very good online poker player. She made good pocket money. You were always content with few material possessions. You were respectful of others, social and easygoing. I rarely saw you grumpy, except once when our landlord accidentally broke a pot containing an orchid just emerging after a year of dormancy. At the end of the day, you would frequently check in with me and ask, "How was your day?" I never told you how much I appreciated that simple question. With an unsaid agreement, we would turn on the front porch lights if one of us would be home late. You loved pets, cats in particular, birds, flowers, and plants. I can clearly see your gestures in the way you picked up, cuddled, and spoiled our beloved cat, Django. When we visited a craft market, you bought a beautiful, quite expensive, wooden cutting board. "It's for Django," you said. This animal received the most beautiful plates and bowls in the household. I hope you know, Gwen, that I always admired your ability to see the glass half full, your green thumb, and your eye for aesthetics. When my life got tough in terms of career-related stress, you would come up with a new angle or perspective and would often have those calming words. "Sometimes that's the way it goes," or "there's only so much you can do." Pragmatic and always relevant to help me put things into perspective. I admire your talents with plants and flowers, carving pumpkins and skills in photography. Miss Paula carving the pumpkins. Flower thrived in your hands, and in the fall, you would carve pumpkins beautifully with riches on a broom. Full of excitement, you would then share the results with me, take pictures to send to your sisters, Diane, and with friends. Dot at the end of the sentence. You always had a stylish fashion sense, chose pottery or handmade soaps well, and rolled towels in matching colors in baskets in the bathroom. It seems to me that in death there is no choice. It doesn't discriminate between good or bad, young or old, rich or poor. It's entirely random. We don't get to choose between sudden and slow, when death occurs or how. You left us on June 21st, one of your favorite days when we would sit on the back porch with drinks, watch the summer sky and the curious visiting raccoons. I see this you left behind. I see packed boxes and notes with your handwriting that I know so well. I see flowers and plants in pots on the porches, but by far not as nicely put together as the way you could do that. You are love beyond words and myth beyond measures. You are irreplaceable.
Thank you so much, Constance. Those are great stories. So I first met Gwen Barlee when she interviewed me for the Wilderness Committee 7 years ago this month. I had been interviewed by a committee of people. Gwen was on vacation. I think we all know who called the shots at the Wilderness Committee. So Gwen asked me to attend a third interview with her at the Black Frog. Some of you may know the Black Frog. It's a pub in downtown Vancouver, close to the Wilderness Committee's old office on Water. I had no way of knowing on that day that Gwen not only introduced me to an excellent pub and to the Wilderness Committee, but she introduced me to competitive card playing like I had never experienced. And I have a competitive family, but the Barlees take the cake on that one. We were so competitive. Gwen and I used to compete to see who could stuff the most mail-outs for the Wilderness Committee in a minute. So you'd be like, oh yeah, all the time. And not only Gwen and I participated in that competition. She also introduced me, among many things, to cursing, because I certainly didn't curse before I met Gwen. She had so much passion. I think we both had that in common, particularly when we were dropping the F-bomb. And she had so much fire at the workplace when we were dealing with injustice, unfairness, or we were just annoyed at the government. And she definitely showed me how to use that passion to kick butt every day. She was a strong and inspiring woman and leader to so many of us. The next strong and inspiring woman that was going to speak is the woman that hired Gwen at the Wilderness Committee. Unfortunately, our former executive director, Andrea Reimer, is caught up in city council meetings. So I'm going to invite another civic activist, former board member Stuart McKinnon. Stuart will read Andrea's presentation.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak on behalf of and about the two women who influenced me as an environmentalist more than any other person. So thank you. When Andrea heard the news, she sat down and wrote this, and she posted it on social media, but I'd like to share it all with you tonight. So Andrea wrote, "I am heartbroken to learn of Gwen Barlee's passing. Gwen was the fiercest, humblest, smartest, toughest, most curious, and most competitive community advocate that I've ever worked with. I first met Gwen in 2001 when I was a young, brand new executive director at the Wilderness Committee, totally in over my head, running a $2 million a year organization and doing my first major hire for a new campaign director. Gwen came in straight to the interview from her job at the time as a film production assistant with a dress on over a t-shirt, jeans, and work boots. She was so quiet, so polite, and no one had ever heard of her. These are not the qualities you usually associate with the kind of person you want at the front of the line of Canada's largest membership-based environmental group, especially when the BC Liberals had just been elected to a 77-seat majority with an anti-conservation platform. But I thought she was amazing and fought to get her through the interview process ahead of candidates who were better known and a little less quiet and polite. Within months, Gwen had risen to be a well-respected colleague by our allies and joined the executive team, where she showed great skill at being a bridge builder with social and labor movements, staying exceptionally calm and a brilliantly articulate voice on complex national and provincial policy issues. She worked so hard and would never say no to any assignment we asked her to take on, no matter how ridiculous the scheme we'd dreamed up was. At the same time, she was always the one to ask the difficult but smart questions to make sure we weren't kidding ourselves or wasting resources on sentimental pursuits. There's also not one time in Gwen's professional career that I can remember her putting her own needs ahead of those around her. And she was a fierce advocate for the fair and equitable treatment of staff, members, and volunteers. Gwen was an intensely private person, a hard thing to navigate in an office where people often worked literally around the clock on high-stakes issues and communities that we were deeply connected to, and that relied on us to win no matter what the odds against us. We ate together, navigated rental housing and new technologies together. We solved our life problems together, occasionally worked through the night together, and the result of that was the kind of intimacy usually reserved for family. But it wasn't until our annual staff retreat that I learned that Gwen had been a BC Yukon champion poker player. Unfortunately, I didn't learn this until about 8 hours into a fine evening euchre tournament. A tradition at our retreats when Gwen started winning every game on lone hands despite only having learned the game of euchre hours before. In 10 years of working with her, I never beat her at euchre. The best I could do was be her partner, a guaranteed way of winning all night. And that's the way it was with Gwen. I was very fortunate to have been her sister in arms for 10 years and grateful for the subsequent time she spent on the front line of Canada's environment and social justice movements. She mobilized and championed so many changes, and she proved you didn't need to crash around the human relationships to do it. She was well loved and will be deeply missed. My heart goes out to the big Wilderness Committee family. It's a very tough loss. With love, Andrea Reimer.
So, as we just heard from Stuart and Andrea, Gwen started at the Wilderness Committee in 2001, and I also made that link, but not until recently, that was in fact the year of the 16-year term of the Liberal government in BC. And Gwen spent likely every day, hopefully she had a few days off, of those 16 years at the Wilderness Committee, fighting back against the policies of that government, policies to defund parks, deregulate forestry, privatize rivers. Gwen didn't relent for 16 years. She held them to account. She kept on these issues. And now her hard work, it paid off. Sometime in May, June, July, I lost track. And you know what? I was texting Gwen on the night of election, and I was so skeptical. And she knew it was happening. She knew this change was coming. She had worked every day to help ensure that it happened. Her friend, John Horgan, the Premier of British Columbia, her friend, George Heyman, the new Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, changes so necessary in this province and changes that Gwen worked so hard to make happen. So now we're all going to witness those dreams of Gwen come true, which is it's so amazing for so many of us. Species legislation, funding for BC parks, a national park in the South Okanagan, among many others. Right, George? I'd like to invite George up to say a few words.
Thanks, Beth, and the answer to your last question is in my mandate letter. I want to thank Stuart for representing Andrea here and for rereading Andrea's post, which I remember reading at the time, being not only very moved by, but struck me as so evocative, and evocative in a way that only somebody who knew Gwen well, was a sister, and who loved her dearly could paint a picture that we can hold in our hearts. There's many people in this room who knew Gwen longer than I did, better than I did, but I've always counted Gwen among the people I love to spend time with as a friend. I think, like everyone in this room, we believe and know that Gwen Barlee was a great British Columbian. And I've been to lots of award presentations and dinners where people talk about great British Columbians. But the reason that Gwen was a great British Columbian and will live in our hearts and memory forever as a great British Columbian is because she devoted her working life to enriching British Columbia, enriching British Columbians, not enriching herself. The last time I had an opportunity to speak to Gwen was by phone and email, and it was in the last spring session of the legislature when Gwen was making arrangements with me to deliver a 60,000 plus petition to support endangered species legislation and table it in the legislature. And so when Gwen asked me to do that, it reminded me that it was probably timely to retable a private member's bill that the opposition had tabled in a previous parliament with a draft Private Members Species at Risk Act. And so Gwen and I talked about that. We talked about the timing, the maximum impact, ensuring that any changes that needed to be made to the draft bill were made. And it was the last opportunity I had to work with Gwen, but it was like all the other opportunities I had to work with Gwen, where she was focused, she was creative, she was flexible, and she was committed. So that also made me think about the first time I ever met Gwen, when I was shortly after I became executive director of Sierra Club BC, and Gwen and Joe Foy contacted me and said, welcome, and let's get together for lunch and talk about the things that we can do together. So we met at a Mexican restaurant in Gastown, and Joe walked in and he said, Gwen just had a bicycle accident. I'm not sure she can make it, but we're going to see. And so we ordered lunch, and about 20 minutes later, sure enough, Gwen comes in with her bicycle helmet over her arm and her knees bleeding and scrapes on her arms and road rash everywhere. And like her entire working life, you could not beat it out of Gwen. She just, without missing a beat, hit into this full stride with all the things, all the opportunities we had to make change, all the opportunities we had to work together, and all the things that she believed we could do to protect wild spaces and the environment. Gwen, as people have said, was passionate. She was a great campaigner. She loved wild places. She had a way of sharing through photographs or stories or interviews in the newspaper a real human, warm approach to why she cared about nature and wild places and why we all should and why we had to put them at the center of our decision making. I was talking to a couple of Gwen's current and former co-workers outside, and one of the stories that came up was people sitting in the same office with Gwen when she was dealing with FOI requests, and how she knew every single staffer in the office, and she knew personal quirks about them and what it would take to engage them on a human level and make them part of the conspiracy to get the information that she needed to defend people. But it was also part of the story was about sitting with Gwen. She would be relentless. She would call people many times during the day. And what's unique about Gwen was she would call them as the good cop one moment, and a couple of hours later, she'd call them as the bad cop. And at the end of the day, she would either get what she needed herself or help her colleagues to get it. Gwen had an intensity about her that we all know. She had a great sense of humor. She communicated delight in human interaction and interactions with nature, and she communicated a great personal power in her commitment that inspired other people. It certainly inspired me. She was strong, strategic, clear, and principled. And I can't think of any four qualities that make for a better campaigner, a better human, or a better great British Columbian. I know that the Premier of BC, Gwen's friend, John Horgan, would really have wanted to be here today. And when I talked about the invitation, he checked and quickly became aware that he was scheduled to go to Ottawa and on to Washington. So that's where he is today. But we talked a little bit about about his conversation with Gwen, and he told me a story. He reminded me of Gwen, obviously, as we all know, was the daughter of a politician, a daughter of a cabinet minister in a previous government, Bill Barlee. I know she loved her dad dearly. So she knew what it entailed, and John tried to convince her to run for us. And he thought she would be such a strong MLA, and of course she would have. And he said that what Gwen said to him was, no, it's important you get elected, I support you, I know it's important what you do, but I'm not prepared to put water in my wine. So, Gwen knew the role well, but she knew we needed advocates and campaigners, and we also need people in government to respond to advocates and campaigners. So there's a number of things in my mandate letter. There's other things that are important to me. The South Okanagan Provincial Park, which was of such importance to Gwen, and on which she worked hard, and of so little importance to the previous government. And that's a project that I'm looking forward to working on. And I see that as a potential great legacy for Gwen Barlee. And the other thing I look forward to working on, and I've already initiated work on this, it's in my mandate letter, that BC is no longer one of the last places in Canada without a standalone Species at Risk Act. So I am going to regret not being able to share that work with Gwen directly, but I know that as I work on it and on other issues in the environment, Gwen's voice will be inside my head relentlessly, and I can hear her voice now. Less water, more wine.
It's like George is trying to put us all out of work or something. We're going to win all of our campaigns in, what, a week? I sure hope so. So I'm going to invite up, oh, there we go. I've got a couple of people coming up next, not surprisingly affiliated with the Wilderness Committee in a different way. And on another campaign of Gwen's, which was federal species at risk, originally in 2001 and 2002, trying to get federal species at risk legislation, and once that was achieved, fighting to enforce it. Paula Newman, some of you have mentioned Paula already this evening, is a former staff member at the Wilderness Committee. There's a lot of you out there. And a close personal friend of Gwen. She joined the organization at the same time that Gwen did, and worked with Gwen on this particular campaign. She'll tell us more about that. And I don't think it's likely a coincidence at all that those two worked on this campaign for a year and a half, and then we got federal species legislation, because that's kind of how they roll. And then Paula is the better half of our beloved Devon Page, the Executive Director of EcoJustice, another leader in the environmental movement, and another close personal friend of Gwen's. And I understand that he started at EcoJustice around the same time as Gwen, and they also worked on a species campaign near and dear to our heart, the spotted owl. So I'm going to invite both of them up to say a few words about Gwen.
As Beth mentioned, I worked at the Wilderness Committee in 2001, started there in July. And my job was to do all the logistics, planning the endangered species tour across Canada for Gwen. We were trying to set up booths in a variety of cities across the country to get people to sign cards to really get a stronger, hopefully a stronger endangered species legislation federally. And it came down to probably at the end of August, she was looking for someone to go on the tour with her. And I didn't know Gwen all that well, but I took the risk. And 8 weeks of 24/7 together with Gwen across the country, and both being fairly new in this field, we became very good friends. There's not many people I would have even taken the risk of doing that with. It's a big commitment, and 24/7. It's even tough with this guy. So from that, Gwen and I realized we had a few things in common, and she was much better at the racket sports than I was, but she took me on as a squash partner, a weekly squash partner, challenged me. I'm not competitive, and Gwen was, and she actually wasn't competitive with me. We never kept score in a squash game, which
Unbelievable. Yeah.
maybe in her head, but she never rubbed it in my face. I also made up for it because then we'd go out for brunch afterwards, and I'd quite often I'd invite her over for supper, which ended in a game of a threesome of crib. And that's where we saw the competitiveness come out. Not directly towards me, but especially towards Devin. And one of the funniest things that, an attribute of Gwen that I picked up while on the tour was she'd always ask, what do you think the odds are that this would happen? So whenever we were nearing the last curve of the crib board, she would analyze who was gonna win. I think Devin always had about a 20% chance of winning. Paula had about an 80% chance of winning, and Gwen was probably 56% chance winning. So those were fun memories. So we had her over regularly for Sunday dinners, but one of the things I feel very honored, knowing that Gwen does not like to cook, Devin and I were actually invited over for supper, and she made us a meal 2 times. And she was a good cook. Constance can attest to that. We had a wonderful salmon dinner up in the North Shore. But one of the other things, whenever she'd come over, she was an animal lover, and we had 2 cats and a dog, and she especially adored cats, and she loved our one cat, Cammie. And Cammie, though, was very shy and didn't want to come and sit on Gwen's lap, and even though Gwen tried, I don't know, Gwen had some sort of scent, or maybe just the cat whisperer in her. She'd take off her scarf, and Cammie would go nuts on her scarf or on her bag, but wouldn't come on to Gwen. So I would love a scarf of Gwen's just to get my cat going. It was just, I wish I would have had a video of it. It was just amazing. But some of the things that we ended up having yearly traditions that I didn't do this year because Gwen wasn't there. In March, we'd have her over, and we'd we'd actually, predict who was going to win the Oscars, and of course that's a competitive thing. In May, we would usually go and buy all our plants together, and as Gwen would teach me, I learned so much from Gwen about different kinds of plants, how to arrange them. As Constance mentioned, she had an eye. I went over and saw the way she arranged plants. It was amazing. And then in October, she started the tradition, but we got going on carving pumpkins. And usually, the Sunday before Halloween, we would carve pumpkins, and then she would take pride. We'd have to put the candles in, put them all on the steps, and take photos, and I'm sure, hopefully, many of you have seen the photos. She would also share lots of wonderful stories of childhood. And I remember one of her favorite stories. Her dad would take them in ghost towns and things like that and find, if he'd buy a ghost town, I think it was in one of the houses, he found a safe. And he thought he had cleared it all out, and he told the girls, you can have whatever you find in the safe. And so Gwen tells this story that she said, I just reached in the back, and there was this little shelf on the back that he didn't notice, and I pulled out, and she found a handful of precious jewels. I think they were garnets or rubies or whatever. And her dad was like, no, you can't have those. And her mom said, you told the girls they could have whatever they found. And she had a ring or some kind of a piece of jewelry made out of that. So that was always kind of a fun story. As you know, she was an amazing photographer. I tried to learn some things with her, and we actually did take a photography class together. I was always happy I was on the same side of the issues with Gwen. Didn't ever want to be on the other side. She was always anxious to tell us of her latest FOI request and all the things that she had learned. I have to say, I think about Gwen every day, and I miss her every day. I'm grateful to have been friends with her for 16 years, and I'll miss her so much.
Thank you.
So I want to make this easy on myself by talking about the crib first, because so we had these Sunday crib contests, and they were marathons. And the thing is, Gwen never won, and so just to be clear, I never won either, because Paula's a better person. So Paula wasn't competitive. What happened was Gwen and I competed so much that Paula just drove up the middle, and she won all the goals. The relation, it's heartening to hear Beth and others talk about Gwen's competitive nature, because even though Gwen and I were on the same side, we were relentlessly competitive. And I can only equate it to sibling rivalry. So Gwen and I were the same age. We were born a month apart. We started in BC's environmental movement a month apart, and I still remember Joe bringing Gwen over, and that was back in the day when you could call a press conference and fill a room. And we had called a press conference, and about that time, I think Gwen might have been at the Wilderness Committee, maybe weeks, and for me about a month, and we started the Spot Owl court case, and it was just crazy. And we were following Joe into a press conference, and I said to Gwen, I really don't know what's going on here. And she said, neither do I. And we just that was the relationship from that point forward. But two things so Gwen was the superstar when it came to FOI. Just so everybody knows, I did the first FOI request on behalf of Gwen. So, so I did one of those, and then about 6 months into it, I was getting other requests to FOIs, and I said, look, I'm a lawyer, I'm supposed to know this, but nobody knows this better than Gwen. So I did, for 15 years, I've done referrals to Gwen when I've had requests for FOI. I feel so honored. At EcoJustice, for those of you that don't know, we provide free legal services to protect the environment. And in a circumstance, I think Joe coined the phrase, we take no hopers. We just take these long shots. And what we typically say is, we might lose a case, but we're going to win the issue. But to win the issue, we have to have people working outside the courtroom as hard as we do inside. And people would say, how hard? And you know what? I said it a couple of times out loud, but in my mind, it was as hard as Gwen Barlee. No one worked as hard as Gwen. Now, to end on a good note, I'll tell you about the first court case we did representing Gwen. I argued in court. We head out on the courthouse steps. Gwen stole a show on media. You guys know she was a media superstar. And we had to sit down afterwards and explain, you got to share the media with the other clients. So those are the kind of memories that I have with Gwen. I think more than a peer, most of the time I was just in awe.
Yeah, thank you so much, Devin and Paula. I have another issue to talk about, because Gwen was on everything all the time. Not to mention the US politic reference, I really like that. Even things she wasn't involved in, she was involved in. She was super committed, as many of you know, to the broader sense of justice, not just the environmental movement, but as she worked hard to make links between our work and that of other social justice groups. One of those groups was the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and still is, actually. Was and is. And I'd like to invite the chair of the Wilderness Committee Board, the Associate Director of the CCPA, Shannon Daub, up. Shannon. Lost track. Oh, there you are. Thank you.
Oh, well, I have to admit that Gwen's departure didn't feel real until tonight, so I find myself slightly surprisingly overcome. I didn't think Devin was going to be the one to make me cry. He's such a straight face normally. Thanks, Devin. Yes, so I got to know Gwen through my work at the CCPA. As Beth said, Gwen had a strong
a moral compass pointing towards social justice as she did towards environmental stewardship. I was struck, when I first met her, she would come to meetings at the CCBA. She was very generous with her time, and I was struck immediately by her incisive and strategic mind. She didn't always say a lot during meetings, but when she did open her mouth, you knew you were going to get the most insightful and useful comment or advice or analysis of the situation of the entire meeting that you would get from anybody. And it was a real pleasure to get to know her more, and Joe and Beth and the others at the Wilderness Committee. By joining the board, I'd long held the Wilderness Committee in very high regard, and the more I've gotten to know the organization, the more it feels like a sister organization to the CCPA. The focus on system change and root causes, the coalition and collaborative orientation, and also just, the folks at the Wilderness Committee, and Gwen was the lead among them, just all out scrappers. They didn't, she just is remarkable to watch her work. You can see how much Gwen is held in high regard by people within the organization and beyond from the comments that people are sharing tonight. At one point we did, the Wilderness Committee is this super grassroots, do amazing things with almost no money kind of spirit. But of course, over the years, there were some things that they neglected to do. They were so focused on winning the campaigns that there were a few of the kind of systems that hadn't been put in place. So we got to do the first ever evaluation process of the E-team. And that, so of course we got to do interviews with a whole variety of people, campaign allies, staff, other board members, and what really just came through is, it's a remarkable combination, that competitive nature, but also at the same time, Gwen was a phenomenal ally. She was a mentor to many, many people, and such a strong fighter and strategist. And you don't see that combination of competitive, scrappy streak, along with such humility and willingness to give yourself to others in very many people. Gwen's commitment and the Wilderness Committee's commitment to building alliances, and especially working with on social justice issues, is something that Gwen had a lot to do with. Her understanding that the environmental movement's success is tied to issues of equality and economic justice was something that she held very profoundly. And her interest in private power, corporations, and the IPP issue is something that led the Wilderness Committee to take a much stronger stand and a more nuanced stance than most other environmental organizations were willing to, and was a real really important piece of her leadership over the years. And the Wilderness Committee and its allies were able to mobilize a tremendous grassroots base of opposition to that policy, which is a testament to her work and that very grassroots, scrappy spirit of the organization. So I also, as the chair of the board, just want to thank everyone who has made donations to the Gwen Barlee Memorial Fund. Those are a great way to honor her memory. And also, I want to remind us, of course, that there are many other ways that we could honor Gwen's memory. Gwen wasn't with us to get to experience and get to the end of the longest and most frustrating game of political suspense ever that I'm aware of lived through. But I hope that another way that her memory will be honored is as George talked about, through the creation of a new park. There's lots of other opportunities to honor Gwen's memory, of course. Canceling Taseko Mines permits, perhaps. Perhaps putting an end once and for all to, that's another piece of drama that Gwen unfortunately doesn't get to see the end of, which is Taseko's frivolous lawsuit against the Wilderness Committee for telling the truth about the Fish Lake mine. So in her honor, let's hope that those things go the Wilderness Committee's way, and that there's a lot of wine in all of our future. Thank you.
13 of those 16 years, Gwen's own words, Gwen was determined to get a national park reserve in the South Okanagan-Similkameen region. Gwen, obviously born and raised in the South Okanagan, cared a whole lot about that particular campaign. And some of the pictures back there from the South Okanagan, we went looking in the archives to pick pictures, and there are so many amazing photos. Gwen, you can tell how much she cared about that region through the photos that she took. So we're gonna start, we have a couple people tonight to speak about that campaign and their relationships with Gwen as an alliance and as a friend. Chloe O'Loughlin is first. She's the former executive director of CPAWS, and she worked with Gwen for a long time on that campaign. Chloe.
Boy, it's really wonderful to meet all of these friends that have had the same experience as me with Gwen. Gwen and I were really similar in many ways. We both loved gambling, as you've heard tonight. I traveled with the circus and dealt blackjack when I was younger. I played squash as well, and I grew up mucking around in the wilderness and loving it. I also played cards and games, and one of my good memories is driving up to the Okanagan with Gwen, and she always had these car games, these travel games. And one of them was you choose a letter, and you have to take turns saying an animal whose name started with that. So we would start with the letter B, and I'd come up with bear and baboon, and she'd come up with bandicoot and barnacle, and she'd come up with, liger and mercat, and I was still back at cat and dog. She was competitive, but she was brilliant, truly brilliant. Neither of us were ever willing to give up, and I just loved to be with her, just fighting the fight. And we were both loyal. I mean, Gwen would be the first person to come to my rescue if I was being unfairly attacked, and she'd organize people to take care of her friends. We were also very different in our approaches, and at CPAWS we were kind to politicians, and we would compromise. And Gwen had this philosophy that you could hammer somebody really, really hard, but you'd never nail them to the floor, because they always had to get up and crawl away. Or if they were good, they could walk away proudly, because they did what she knew was right. So for years, 11 years, Gwen and I met for coffee once a week. She wouldn't work in the big collaborations, which we would, but she would collaborate. And we would have coffee, and she would come with this piece of paper that had tiny, tiny print, and it was just, to do her to-do list was like 150 things on one page, all in priority and crossing things off, and she was just amazing. I, of course, had my pencil and a piece of napkin to make my list. But what we would do is, unbeknownst to the politicians, and any politician in the room can close their ears, is what we would coordinate our activities. So I would arrange to meet with the Minister of the Environment in a month's time, and Gwen would hammer them in the press for a month, and just loved it. And when I say hammer, she was had every single fact right. She had totally ethical. She was like the most brilliant person in getting her story out with the media. Totally pissed it off, because we'd put out a press release that they would call the Wilderness Committee to get Gwen's opinion before they ever called us. But for a month, she would really, really hammer them, and then I would go in, the friend to the politician, and really sympathize with them, because the evil Gwen Barlee was hammering them, and I could come up with solutions, which they would agree to just anything to get away from Gwen. In 2016, I nominated her for the YWCA's Women of Distinction Award. And we talked about her getting those parking meters out of parks, her stopping private resorts in the provincial parks, protecting hundreds of thousands of acres for the spotted owl, and getting IPPs stopped on the salmon-bearing rivers. And her work with Lyme's disease was truly personal and inspired. And the complex chronic disease program at Women and Children's Hospital is a large part to do with Gwen. And of course, when she was nominated as by the Globe and Mail as one of British Columbians Who Matter, they really focus on her expertise with the Freedom of Information Act request, which is from her mother, that skill. So when Gwen was too ill on our campaign to actually analyze the request that she put in, she guided me through looking at 3,800 pieces of paper and coming up with some kind of result. And she was just brilliant, saying, every piece of paper is 1 second, so you only have 3,800 seconds to go, Chloe. And as a result, we show that 92% of the submissions were in favor of the park. One of my favorite examples of the power of Gwen was when the environmental groups, led by Organizing for Change, would organize an event, a wine and cheese event, near the legislative building in Victoria, so that the ministers and the senior staff could come over and chat with us, and we could do relationship building. I got a call from the minister's office saying, and it was Barry Penner, saying that Mr. Penner would not be attending if Gwen Barlee was going to be there. And so I said, well, she's doing a great job, a legitimate job. She's factually right. I'm not going to uninvite her to an event, which she's been part of. And he said, okay, the minister's not coming. The minister's very clear, he's not going to come if Gwen is there. So at my weekly coffee meeting, of course it would be a real disaster if the Minister of the Environment didn't show up at this event. But I talked to Gwen about this when we had our weekly coffee meeting, and she said, Chloe, the minister is terrified of being in a room with me. He would hide in his office rather than possibly be seen anywhere near me. This is great. She said, Chloe, you've made my day. She said, I won't be there. I don't need to be there. I'll be sitting here with the biggest smile on my face ever. So even when Gwen's treatment was failing and she was very, very ill, she said to me that she would continue to work on 2 campaigns that were hugely important to her. And one was the South Okanagan National Park, and the other was the endangered species legislation. And I'm really heartbroken that she won't be there to see the result of her work. I miss her so much. She was my ally and my friend and my colleague and my spiritual twin. But I can tell you, if I was sitting in that coffee shop with Gwen and those 2 pieces, those campaigns were coming to fruition, she would say, Chloe, I'm not going to be there. I don't need to be there. And I'll have the largest smile on my face ever.
So I realize we're running a little bit late, and I know it's hot in here, and there's probably at least another 30 minutes. So I'm going to talk a lot faster. Pay attention. And everyone else is going to talk really fast. I'm going to invite Doreen up from the South Okanagan.
I'm really short. So I want you all to know that I was never a campaigner, but Chloe and Gwen made me one. The members of our South Okanagan-Similkameen National Park network are as diverse as the land we're trying to protect. They're engineers, they're biologists, they're business people, they're airline employees, they're farmers, equestrians, and even an astrophysicist. A meeting with them is like trying to herd cats. They all have their own opinions. We meet monthly by conference call with CPAWS and the Wilderness Committee, and Gwen was a cornerstone of these meetings. We would always anticipate these calls with Gwen for her ideas on how we would move forward with difficult issues, especially those of media interest. Our group always wanted me to say how much they missed having Gwen at the meetings recently. And they wanted me to pass on to Gwen, Gwen's family and her friends and her co-workers, how much they miss Gwen and the gratitude that they have for her guidance and her inspiration to helping them meet the goals of this National Park campaign. We will continue to fight for this campaign with the skills that Gwen has given us until we reach that goal of a national park reserve. It sounds like it's not too far from now. But Minister, we would like to remind you, it is a national park, not a provincial park. I think you misspoke. Gwen was a great mentor, and many times she helped us through some sticky situations. One, in the very beginning, when I first met Gwen, I was supposed to be doing some fundraising, and I had this new donor, and he had sent a rather large check to support one of the South Okanagan projects. And he sent it to the Wilderness Committee instead of CPAWS. So the check had already been cashed, and I called Gwen in a great big panic, and I said, oh my God, Gwen, what am I gonna do? You know, the check is cashed, and what am I gonna do? And the money's supposed to go to CPAWS. And she said, don't worry, don't panic. We'll send it back to him. She said, you just explain to the donor what happened. It's an honest mistake, and everything will be okay. So very nervously, I called this donor to apologize, and I asked him if he could send another check to CPAWS, and I think I kind of quivered when I said that. And he said, oh, no problem. Tell Wilderness Committee that they can keep that money, and I'll issue another check to CPAWS. So this donor continues to be tremendous support to the National Park in the South Okanagan, to the Wilderness Committee, and to CPAWS. So as I thought back about Gwen and some of the things, we had some really fun times together because she often stayed at my house when she was in the Okanagan. But earlier in the campaign, when I didn't know her very well, and she stayed at my house for the very first time, I was in awe of this woman, first of all. I was really in awe of her. She seemed to be able to just move mountains, say the right thing, and do the right thing. And I just, here's me, I'm just sort of a retired person. And I thought, oh, she's staying with me. So I innocently asked her if she'd like to play a game of Scrabble. Her eyes lit up, and she said, I love Scrabble. So now I'm not a bad Scrabble player, In fact, I pretty much beat everybody I know. But Gwen got 3 7-letter words in one game. Now, I get a 7-letter word maybe once a year. Anyway, she was really competitive. And I really enjoyed that game of Scrabble with her. But she did admit that it was all about memory. And then she said, you know, I used to play bridge. No, sorry, not bridge, poker. And I paid my way through school. Well, Gwen was full of surprises. And some of the words that come to my mind when I think of Gwen are hands-on. She wouldn't do anything that she wouldn't ask you to do anything that she wouldn't do herself. She was genuine, she was tireless, powerful, inquisitive. She was committed, she was savvy and tactful. She was straightforward, solution-oriented. She was intense. She was passionate and dedicated to whatever she put her mind to. She was knowledgeable, fair, truthful, and wise. She was an excellent photographer, a funny and loyal friend. She kept confidences and her personal life very private. Gwen was a true leader, a teacher, and a friend. My life was made richer for having known Gwen, and I miss her deeply, and I'll miss her every day. Thanks for listening.
So, because I'm shortening all these introductions so I don't take too much time, I'm going to say 2 words that every staff member of the Wilderness Committee has heard, and it's Lyme disease. Because Gwen was an activist all day, every day in our office and outside about awareness of Lyme disease. And we all are taking our vitamin D religiously, and we all check for ticks. And if we don't, we will hear it from Gwen. So I'm going to invite up a couple of speakers next. The next one, a former NDP MLA and Saanich Municipal Councillor who knew Gwen from our advocacy work in land and species preservation, as well as Lyme disease. And some of you will have seen media articles and FOI releases that Gwen did together with David Coverley, who describes himself as an outspoken member of the board of the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation until earlier this year. And I think the outspokenness may be something he and Gwen had in common. So please come up here, David.
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to say a few words about my good friend and colleague, Gwen Barlee. Tributes to Gwen emphasize her connection to the environment, and rightly so, and her savvy advocacy on its behalf. We know how much she liked to be out in it, directly experiencing the values she was working to protect. Somewhere on one of those hikes, I don't know when it happened, Gwen encountered an Ixodes pacificus tick that silently took a meal from her, and in return left her with Borrelia, a bacterial infection commonly known as Lyme disease. The barriers she encountered in getting that infection diagnosed and treated, and her compromised immune system restored, revealed how badly flawed our public health protocols are on Lyme disease. So once she got herself sufficiently back to health to be able to resume full-on campaigning, she added a new theater of advocacy to the mix. Gwen Barlee became a Lyme advocate, working to protect our inner environment in much the same way she worked to protect the outer environment. And that advocacy is how we came to meet one day, unexpectedly on my part. I knew her already, but at the BC legislature in the fall of 2005. I was a newly minted health critic at the time who knew a fair bit about wait times and extra billing, but had never heard of Lyme disease. Gwen was someone I knew and respected from her advocacy work. She and Jim Wilson, the president of CanLyme, briefed me on what it meant to get a debilitating disease the doctors either couldn't or wouldn't diagnose, what it was like to get sicker and sicker while you get passed around from specialist to specialist who can only rule out their specialty, but couldn't or wouldn't diagnose what you did have. It was there I first heard about the number of BC families having to go stateside for accurate testing and diagnosis, paying out of pocket for care in the land of private medicine that they were being denied here at home in the land of socialized medicine. I can only wonder how I'd have felt if what I was hearing from those two came from a total stranger, but it was Gwen Barlee. And one thing you knew about her with absolute certainty was there was no BS, none. So I gave the two of them an undertaking that I'd ask them questions of the Minister of Health in the legislature, thinking that this was naively, perhaps a misunderstanding that we could clear up collegially. But the answers I heard from the minister via his staff were all of the don't worry, be happy variety. There's no Lyme in BC. There are only a couple of confirmed cases a year. There's a dependable test that always can be relied on to catch it, if you have it. People that do have it, they get prompt treatment. This was so like what I've been told by Gwen to expect to hear that it set my alarm bells off and it piqued my interest in asking more questions. And so began a creative association between the two of us that grew and progressed for over a decade. She was very public with her concerns as a Lyme sufferer who'd experienced the system's shortcomings firsthand. This had impact because she was so articulate and analytical. Over the years, we did many Lyme events together, rallies with Lyme sufferers, all enduring the same plight, awareness events to alert families to the threat, media events to put pressure on government to act. Gwen was a powerful voice, calling on the system to stop contesting patients' illness and place them where they belonged, back at the center of the healthcare that they were entitled to. She was a courageous advocate, going up against some of the most powerful and insulated interests in public health and medicine. She was fearless. Interests that are treated generally as near gods by the media. Whatever they say is the truth. People prepared to dissolve the complexities of a stealth infection, a disabling infection, into dismissive sound bites like, it's hard to get and it's easy to cure. When in reality, as Gwen knew, Lyme is easy to get and it's damn hard to cure. But Gwen got very good at contesting those paradigms, turning them back on them with facts and analysis. I think she was a born subversive on behalf of good causes. She did some remarkable work with the media. Her press releases were fantastic, often getting the cynical medium to carry messages of hope and the necessity for change. Success often came after she'd uncovered some revealing documents using her formidable FOI skills. That's how the Schmidt report came to light, a report so embarrassing for the government that they immediately announced a new complex chronic disease initiative to counter its impact. It's how she got the CDC doctors survey, which showed that 2/3 of practitioners in British Columbia didn't even know that a bullseye rash is automatically diagnostic of Lyme disease and should be followed by treatment. Perhaps more disappointingly in the end, it was part of confirming that the fix was in at the BC Complex Chronic Diseases Clinic, which was initially billed as a vehicle for treating chronic Lyme, but wound up never treating even a single case of Lyme disease. Not one case. You talk about cynicism in politics and medicine. Despite all the pushbacks by the high mucky-mucks, Gwen never lost hope of making positive change. That was her fortitude, her character, her signature as an advocate. She was a force to be reckoned with. In this case, a voice for all those marginalized by a public healthcare system that should know better than to do what it's still doing, abandoning the patient. She knew her cause was just, not simply because she herself had Lyme, but because her having Lyme showed her exactly what needed to be changed. Very powerful. Gwen always kept her facts straight, and she never stopped acquiring insights. She was unafraid to look at the dark side of nature, of politics, public policy. She was a fighter for positive change. We all miss her presence badly, but none of us is alone in that feeling. There's a huge community out there who, just as I do, will always find inspiration in Gwen's example. Rest in peace, Lyme warrior extraordinaire. Know that we will continue the fight.
So the next tribute comes from a friend, fellow activist, and organizer, along with Gwen, of the Vancouver Lyme Awareness, Karen Marchand.
Good evening. I met Gwen in the fall of 2011 at a local Lyme support group, where I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and warmth. I had no idea how important our meeting would become and that I would one day be working with her in the Lyme political arena. I was but one of many within the Lyme community who were honored to have her unwavering help and support in fighting for the recognition of Lyme disease in BC. So I stand before you today as a representative of all the lives she touched in our community. On behalf of the Vancouver and Victoria support groups and the greater Lyme community, I would like to offer our most sincere and heartfelt condolences to Gwen's family. And Gwen, if you are listening now, we hope we can give you your life justice in our remembrance of you. She was a force for change, an articulate speaker who used her voice to champion change and education. She was a regular guest on many radio broadcasts and gave numerous interviews on both TV and in print. And she spoke at countless Lyme events and demonstrations. Not only was she incredibly intelligent, concise, strategic, and well-researched, she was an excellent communicator with a witty sense of humor, who could convey the facts about Lyme in a way that both educated and captivated audiences. And one could not pay homage to Gwen without acknowledging her sheer genius in using FOIs to uncover buried truths. She single-handedly gained a huge win for the Lyme community with her dogged pursuit, using FOIs to uncover a report commissioned by the Provincial Health Services Association of BC. This report, which came to be known as the Schmidt Report, not only documented the crisis that is Lyme disease in BC, but backed up what advocates had been sounding the alarm for years. Another example of her tenacity, well, a number of years back, Gwen heard about a doctors-only education event about Lyme disease. She was determined to attend, so she confidently arrived at the registration desk, albeit strategically late. When they could not find her registration, she, in the one-of-a-kind way that was only Gwen, remained so confidently nonchalant about this mysterious mix-up that they finally just ushered her into the conference. Gwen was not done yet. Not one to just sit back and quietly observe. During the question and answer period, she asked poignant questions that many of the doctors in attendance later approached her as this crackerjack new GP who had such a wealth of knowledge on Lyme, and they wanted to meet with her. Boy, did that ever make her grin from ear to ear. Her eyes sparkled when she later recounted this story. She had moxie. She was always one step ahead of everyone. She was a tireless activist who spent countless hours educating the public, politicians about tick-borne illness. What she did for the Lyme community as a whole is so huge and far-reaching that it is unquestionably beyond what can be shared here today. What is of equal importance is that her sense of justice, her passion, and her fearlessness in tackling the government head-on empowered all of us to find the advocate in ourselves. What also deeply endeared her to each of us was her ability to make us feel important, that our story mattered, and that you could make a difference by telling it. She empowered each of us to use our voice. Many of those who knew her were cheered on by her with these words: "You can do it. You are so capable. You will do such a great job, and you always do. I can hear her now. I'm sure you can too." Thank you, Gwen, for empowering us to tell our stories and giving us a voice. We love you and miss you. Rest in peace.
We've heard a bit about Gwen's FOIs, and now we're going to hear from the other experts in the province. Daryl Evans, the founder and executive director for 20 years of the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. Gwen, not surprisingly, worked with them and was a member of their board of directors. So, Daryl.
Thanks very much. So much has been said about Gwen's FOI work that I will be brief. But this has driven home to me how fortunate we were to have Gwen working with us. I think I took her for granted a little bit, although she joined the group is FIPA, the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. She joined our board of directors in 2007, and she remained on the board until this year even. One of the greatest rewards of working in the nonprofit sector is the wonderful people you meet, and Gwen was certainly at the very peak of that for me. She was at the summit of the people I knew who care about the things that mattered most. But aside from that, what impressed me about Gwen is that she was a joy to meet and a real pleasure to be with. And I remember that even more than any of the activism she did, how refreshing it was to be with her. She was one of these people who just gives off an aura of joy, compassion, and the joy of living, and she gave that to me. We know how enormously dedicated and competent she was. I like to say she brought light and warmth and soul to her activism in a way I know of no other activist who brought that to it. Gwen's environmental activism was what brought her to our group. She was one of the foremost users of the FOI Act in British Columbia and Canada. She understood that access to information is critical, an absolute necessity for effective social activism and progress. And I can't say it any better than is already up on the Wilderness Committee website. What she did in the way of FOI strategic use of provincial and federal freedom of information laws was Gwen's trademark tactic. She created persuasive campaigns based on data gleaned from the government's own files. She held decision makers' feet to the fire, releasing facts to the public to increase government accountability on environmental matters. When I first started planning my retirement from FIPA in 2012, Gwen was number one on my list, but I just took a look at her. I said, I will never pry Gwen away from her environmental activism, even though she was my number one choice. I never made much money working in FIPA, especially in the early years, but I was shocked when I learned how little Gwen and other staff made at the Wilderness Committee. Actually shocked. And I was speechless when she said that she was making her living from poker winnings. Staggered. I understand that the staff pay situation has improved since then, and that's a really good thing. Gwen was always incredibly busy, needless to say, but she was always there and willing to participate in any campaign or project concerning freedom of information and open government. She never said no to me, including other projects I started after I retired from FIPA, the Open Government Project, and a new institute for those studies. My last contact with Gwen was when I called her in April, this April, to see if she would agree to be interviewed for a documentary my new group is doing on government records and democracy. I had no idea she was ill, kind of not one of her very close friends. So I didn't know how seriously ill she was. In spite of that, according to the director, she agreed, she seemed cheerful, and she gave a great interview. That was in April. Gwen was a great spirit and will be missed. I'm very pleased that there's a memorial fund in her name to carry on her activism. And I sure hope we name that park in the South Okanagan, Gwen Barlee Park.
So we heard a lot about her FOIs, but one of Gwen's skills that went hand in hand was she was a bit of a media spokesperson, for any of you that might have known that. And I always feel like the media folk that came to the Wilderness Committee or called to cover Gwen were like, oh, this one's easy, man. She'll give me all the information I know, all the information I don't know, anything else, and she'll say it perfectly, and I'll be back in like an hour and a half. So, I mean, that is an honored experience for those that got to interview Gwen, and we were very lucky at the Wilderness Committee, also the Lyme disease community, that she was able to take the information that she discovered and bring it to light for the people in the province of British Columbia. Larry Pinn, an environmental reporter from the Vancouver Sun, had a lot of experience working with Gwen, and he's going to say a few words.
Thanks very much. I never went for a beer with Gwen to the Black Frog, which is just a couple blocks from where the Vancouver Sun used to be, but I do regret it now. Our relationship was, it was professional, and I have to say that she stood out from the crowd of. And as an environment reporter, full time, I get, you can just imagine how many emails and phone calls I get, but Gwen was rose above all of them. I could always trust her when she called. That was the real goods she was giving me, and I have a long memory for people who give me lead me astray, and especially when I end up printing it and get burned. So that was never the case with Gwen. She was quite an amazing person, and the issue that we worked on several, but the one we worked together on most was the run of river issue. She would do FOIs and give them to me. I would do FOIs and I'd give them to her, and together we built a trust relationship on that, and ultimately the Pacific Salmon Foundation did a very extensive report on the whole impact of run of rivers on salmon fry because of those efforts. And I think Gwen is primarily responsible for that. The other thing, she was also known for torquing it up. And Joe, sometimes I think you must make this a condition of employment. Sometimes, you're good at it, and she was good at it. And once you've got the basic facts and figures laid out, I've got no problem with torquing it up. So I went through just a few of them, and I'll just pick out one. This is just very, her quotes just leapt from the newspaper all the time, but they're always backed, and this is just one. And she said, "The toads are everywhere. They're They're in the cut blocks, they're on the road, they're under the tires of logging equipment. There's no way in a million years that you can log in this habitat without killing toads. And, she'll be missed in a lot of ways, but and including all the ways I've heard today from me as well. And I had a partner for a long time who had Lyme disease, so we shared that kind of interest as well. But in terms of an environmentalist who you could count on, and who really was an investigative reporter at heart, I feel. She was one of a kind, and I will miss her. Thanks very much.
Larry's kind of famous in our office, and I've heard him mentioned so many times. I've never met him till tonight, and then I said, oh yeah, I got this FOI dumped on me yesterday that Gwen was fighting for. He's like, oh, is there a story there? Gwen's not here, just give us a few minutes. We're gonna need a few days for that one. So this was the mention, I'm glad, a very good segue to Gwen's dedication to the wild rivers of BC over the past, well, decade at least. And that she was, when I started at the Wilderness Committee in 2010, like one of the sole people in this province in the environmental movement. She knew everything about those projects, and what she didn't know, she FOI'd, and then she knew. And she remembered it all. She remembered numbers and stats and dates like nobody. I was amazed. And it felt like she was alone, but the good news is that we did have some great allies on that campaign. Sage Aaron is a former Wilderness Committee board member until recently when she moved to the NDP as the new comms director, but she worked for a long time along with at COPE 378, now Move Up, on that campaign. They were amazing allies, and I know how much Gwen respected having them on this campaign to stop the privatization of BC's rivers. So Sage, come on up.
Hi. So I first met Gwen in 2007. I was the public power campaigner for Move Up, the union that represents BC Hydro workers. I met Gwen and Joe in the Wilderness Committee boardroom in Gastown, high in the air, overlooking the rail tracks and the harbor. We met as part of Move Up's efforts to reach out to environmental organizations and talk about private run-of-river projects. And these weren't always easy conversations. The threat of climate change was, and is, so real, and movement towards solutions so slow, and many groups focused on the promise of private power than the very real problems. I didn't know that Gwen and Joe had been contacted by Tom Rankin, a rancher near the Ashley River up in Squamish, and he was concerned about the giant project planned on that river and the damage to fish and wildlife habitat. Tom took us all on a guerrilla tour of the publicly accessible parts of the site, and it was a mess. And on a river that held blue-listed species. So we found common cause and camaraderie. Andrew Radzik, who's also here, was also a big part of that campaign. And a big part of this campaign and its success was Gwen's gift for analysis. She saw past the greenwashing to what private run-of-river projects really were, a new gold rush on BC's rivers. Her analysis cut to the heart of the matter, that power projects should be regionally planned, environmentally appropriate, and publicly owned. We worked in tandem for several years in what was, in my experience, a great model for labor and environmental solidarity, focusing on areas of agreement and subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, influencing each other's culture and policies. She came to Move Up Steward seminars to talk about campaigning and working with allies. She used us as an example, and eco-justice and CPAWS as well. And during those years, I got to know Gwen. I found out that her mother used to work with, my mother used to work with her father in the BC's previous NDP government. And Premier John Horgan wasn't the only one to recognize and covet her talent. Once, after her listening to her methodically demolish a private power proponent on CKNW, my colleague Mike Bruce and I hatched a plan to convince her to run for public office. In my mind, she was perfect, whip-smart, poised, principled, and deeply rooted in the love of the land around her. I don't know if she ever took us seriously, but she eventually rebuffed us. I think she worked on her metaphor since then, but what she told us is that she would have trouble submitting to caucus discipline. I'm grateful to have known and worked with Gwen, and I was and am still inspired by her. I'm thankful for her legacy. Thank you.
I don't think Joe and I realized how many people tried to steal Gwen from us. Wow, feeling pretty competitive right now. We're gonna go down that list of amazing allies out there. Gwen, obviously it's too long to present tonight, but Gwen worked with the BCGU, and they obviously can't go unnamed tonight. Particularly the BC Park system, but I learned recently even on the issues of forestry in this province under the Liberal government, Gwen joined members of that union to fight on these campaigns for the Wilderness Committee. Emmett Davis is a longtime 10-year friend and colleague of Gwen's, and she is currently a director at BCGU, so Emmett, come on up.
Hi. I met Gwen in 2007, like Sage. At the time, I was executive director of the BC Citizens for Public Power, which was the citizens group that worked against the Liberal government's attempt to privatize BC Hydro. So we worked in collaboration with COPE 378, now Move Up, and very closely with the Wilderness Committee. But I'm going to speak a little bit about my personal relationship with Gwen tonight. So like many of you, I expect I've spent the last number of weeks since Gwen's death vacillating between despair and grief. And I've also spent some time in reflection about what Gwen meant to me as a colleague and as a friend, what I learned from her through over 10 years that we knew each other. With only a few minutes to speak, I thought I'd give you my list of the top 5. 1, do your research. Gwen was always well prepared to argue her position on the issues that mattered to her, but especially around environmental justice and Lyme disease. As you've already heard, she earned a reputation among social justice groups and activists, political organizations, and the media as an expert at extracting and exposing the truth through freedom of information requests. Facts will speak for themselves, Gwen taught me, but sometimes it requires careful work to uncover them. Number 2, play to win. Let's face it, Gwen was fierce. She loved to win. A debate, a campaign, a game of tennis, a hand of poker, anything really. But she had this way of being so animated and warm and good-spirited that it didn't really hurt to lose. Too much. Gwen and I shared a competitive spirit, and I fully expect her to appear in my dreams to report that it's a draw on our ongoing political debates. I was indeed right that she sadly overestimated the Bernie Sanders revolution in the United States. But I am now happy and willing to concede that the NDP and our friend John Horgan pulled off this provincial election. Number 3, don't settle. It takes a special kind of friend, bold and caring, to tell you that your self-respect is slipping, to tell you not to settle in a job where you're undervalued or in a relationship where you're mistreated. And Gwen was that kind of friend to me. She supported me through some of the most challenging personal and professional periods of my life. And she shared in my joy in recent years when I found a wonderful, loving person to share my life with, and when my career took unexpected and tremendously rewarding turns. Four, don't show all your cards. In spite of being a card shark extraordinaire, Gwen's personality was the antithesis of the aloof poker face. She was so engaging. She was a public figure with a broad and diverse social network. It was easy to forget that she was, at the same time, a very private person. I was never more aware of that than over this past year, as she quietly drew inward with a very small, intimate circle to focus on her health. And I have deep respect for her choices. Number 5, focus on what matters. What matters can change as perspective on life changes, and Gwen taught me that. But it probably shouldn't. She made a point of telling me when we visited together in late February that she had learned to meditate, something she would have dismissively described to me at an earlier time as too woo-woo. She was talking to me about balance. Gwen knew what mattered. Health above all else. Family, especially her mom, Kathleen, and her sisters Diane and Veronica. Meaningful work, doing her part for a more just society and a better world, and a small circle of trusted friends. The world was a better place for Gwen's time here, and frankly, it feels a bit more hollow without her. She was a dynamic, charming, beautiful, caring friend, and I loved her. She's gone too soon, but it's left me with some cherished memories and important life lessons. May her memory be a blessing. Thanks.
Ooh, yeah, it's not going to get any easier before the end. I'd like to invite up Laura, Gwen's niece, to give her tribute to Gwen.
There are countless things to say about my Aunt Gwen, who she was, what she did, people she inspired, and who she was inspired by. And we all collectively could probably say quite a bit. And we all saw different sides at different times, but it was always, always Gwen. I saw her all the time, a lot, at 10 p.m. playing Scrabble with my mother, drinking her Earl Grey with cream. Later, she would drink soy or other dairy alternatives unsweetened, which I only mentioned because when she cut out dairy, she told me it was the greatest thing she ever did for her skin. And her skin did look great. And so I cut out dairy, and my skin also improved. My mother also cut out dairy, and it turned out we were all probably lactose intolerant, but she wanted everyone to know that if you have trouble with your skin, maybe try cutting out dairy. She was my #1 confidant for boy problems. She gave unarguably amazing advice. Rational, logical, even-handed, and if the need arose, ruthless. Those are qualities I will never forget, along with the open-mouthed laugh and clap when she found something especially clever, the tongue-in-cheek expression she would get when she was smug about winning, especially over my father, how she loved a good satire, and how astoundingly goddamn infuriating it was to play any sort of word game with her, scratch that game in general, how extraordinarily fun and alive she was in those moments, and she did nothing but fight her entire life for others, for so many different forms of justice, and for herself. These are just a few of the countless things I feel should be said about Gwen, but there will never be enough words to describe her completely. Words can only say so much about the joy in her eyes when she realized that she was winning an argument, which was always. The ferocity of her determination and dedication, her loyalty, her fearlessness, her intense and innate not want but need for justice can really only be conveyed so well secondhand, which is why I'm glad that we could all witness her firsthand. Gwen wrote to me once after a hard month, "Life can be pretty intense at times, especially for women with Barlee blood in their veins. We feel things strongly, both injustices as well as the beauty in the world." The fact that Gwen is not here with us today is one of these great injustices. She inspired everyone she met to feel strongly about both as she did, to recognize and right the injustices and to appreciate the beauty. I feel lucky to have been given the opportunity to know her. I cannot express how much I miss her, but know that Gwen would want us all to appreciate the beauty and fight to right the injustices as she did.
This evening, it might not surprise you that we're giving the last word to Gwen's colleague of 16 years on the Wilderness Committee's executive team, our National Campaign Director, Joe Foy. But I want you to know the truth behind why he's really getting the last word. See, Gwen and I, well, and Joe, and back then Matt, until Matt left, and then we had Joe all to ourselves, we kind of always got the last word. In fact, we got every word when we were in meetings. So, I think it's only fitting, I hope that Gwen would agree, that we give the last word this evening to my amazing colleague, Mr. Joe Foy.
I don't normally write down what I'm going to say, but I've done it this time. Wow, that doesn't normally happen either. I have to admit I was a bit starstruck when I first met Gwen in 2001. Not with Gwen, it was her dad. NDP MLA Bill Barlee, that I admired for his BC, not for his BC cabinet post, but because of his regular TV show, Gold Trails and Ghost Towns, which I was a huge fan of. I could scarcely believe that I was talking with his daughter. I loved that show, and I told Gwen the first day we met. I had Bill's books in my house. For 16 years, Gwen and I worked side by side at the Wilderness Committee. That, of course, meant that for 16 years, we were together fighting all kinds of destructive industrial projects. It takes a certain kind of long-haul stamina to fight anything for that long. And Gwen made it look easy. Her ability to research and then describe the threats facing endangered species, parks, and wild rivers without losing hope or sinking into directionless anger was, I have to say, super impressive. She was a savvy manager and a planner. And she helped to guide the Wilderness Committee through the tight spots that all environmental groups face from time to time. We are here as an organization because of Gwen. She was at the core of her being an extremely compassionate person with a spring steel determination to seek what she called the public good in all things she considered. She was, in my eyes, a real-life, everyday superhero, and I consider myself very lucky indeed to have known and worked with her. In facing the media or on a public speaker's panel, she could be the most civil person in the room. In private, amongst friends, she could and would swear like a sailor, letting her anger pour out over the ruin of rivers or the trashing of species habitat for profit. Truth was Gwen's compass. Hard work and curiosity about life, her secret to success. A pure love of nature and community was her map. She was a loyal friend, solid as a mountain, even in troubled times. When Gwen had your back and all hell broke loose, as it often did, you didn't need to look around to see if she was still there. She was. In some strange twist of fate, Gwen's time at the Wilderness Committee matched, just about perfectly, the BC Liberals' tenure in Victoria. In many ways, when I look back, she was like a person saving books from a burning library, never doubting the worth of her work or that better days would someday come. Gwen had a thing that she did at gatherings and parties, get-togethers. She'd leave unannounced. One moment she'd be there laughing and joking, and the next she'd be gone. For those of you that don't know, it's called an Irish goodbye. And I can hardly believe she's gone from this world. I do believe that her hopes and dreams and schemes to hold on to the wild live on in all of us. Rest in peace, Gwen.
Steady, learning that you have to travel, you have to protest, you have to hone your skills to protect the species she so loved.
The spotted owl. As far as endangered species go, this is top of the list in Canada. 6 weeks ago, environmentalists used a temporary court injunction to cut down attempts to log the area. There's no way that they're going to log the line. But they have. The BC Forest Service now says Caterpillar timber can selectively log an 88-hectare section, although the decision leaves 80% of this forest protected for now.
The owl's been going down 5 times faster than anticipated, and for them to give the go-ahead to log in an area of critical habitat is crazy. I mean, this owl's not going to be around in 10 years at the rate we're going.
Gwen doesn't give up ever.
Within the Sudan Endangered Species Recovery Plans. In the province of British Columbia, we have over 1,000 species at risk. And we're going to lose the spotted owl. We're going to lose the woodland caribou. We're going to lose the Vancouver Island environment unless we wake up and start doing things differently.
Gwen planned and protested and even launched into a new campaign to protect BC's parks.
The government is planning to open the gates to private lodges in public parks.
We're flabbergasted that they just gone ahead and done this behind closed doors.
Gwen Barlee is concerned development in 10 parks around the could have ecological repercussions. She says this is just another cash grab for the Liberal government.
I think what we're trying to do is increase its parks. So what's happened since 2001 is park staffs, with parking meters been put into parks, with rolling back park boundaries along Washington parks. We've actually seen visits drop by 25%.
These documents obtained exclusively by the CBC outline a plan that will request proposals from anyone interested in building lodges including foreign developers.
And this government doesn't give a damn about the environment, and you can see that clearly in their approach towards parks. Parks should be for everybody, it shouldn't be just for people who can afford to own them.
Gwen worked with the Wilderness Committee team to take that leading role in the defense of BC's wild rivers.
Why would an environmentally group be opposed to green power? I mean, initially when I heard about green power, when you hear about hydropower, you think, oh my God, with climate change and global warming, bring it on, it doesn't matter. Who's producing it, where it comes from, it's clean, it's green, it's not producing carbon. And what we have is we have a gold rush right across the province that in 2007 there are up to 500 applications to put in private power projects on pristine streams and rivers across British Columbia. And the government is not looking at cumulative impact, because with these private power projects, it's not just the little turbine in river, that you're diverting sometimes up to 80% of the river through pipes that go on for kilometers and kilometers.
Wants to build 7 small hydroelectric dams on the upper pit salmon-bearing tributaries.
So this project is that when you have a project that's going to damage some streams, when you have a project that's going to impact a wildlife like grizzly bears and wolverines and mountain goats, and when you have a project that wants to put a transmission line through Class A provincial park, that project shouldn't be going that at all.
Good evening, and we begin with what appears to be the kiss of death tonight for a private power project. Build 7 power generating stations on tributaries of the upper pit. And part of its proposal called for a transmission line to run through Pineconeburg Provincial Park. But the project ran up against some serious public opposition, and today the Environment Minister made a decision that could throw up the final roadblock.
Made a decision to pull the plug on the private power project in the upper pit.
Gwen celebrated with us and then went on to investigate and to battle private so-called run-of-river projects across the province. And then Gwen took up a very special cause.
Possibility of creating a new national park in this province. The idea would be to protect the desert, grasslands, and water supplying ecosystems of the South Okanagan-Similkameen valleys.
And what we were really thrilled to find out is that polls showed that 63% of people living in the South Okanagan-Similkameen supported a national park, and just 26% were opposed.
Opposed, perhaps, because all trained vehicles are not allowed in national parks. Neither is hunting.
BC's South Okanagan is one of the most unique ecological regions on the continent, and it's home to a species that is more vulnerable than previously thought. We're talking about rattlesnakes, and unlike most provinces, there is no endangered species legislation to protect them.
He's practically a guy who's been around for eons, and he's managed to survive all this time, but now he's in trouble, and he's in trouble because the habitat that he relies on is being gobbled up by development.
Environmental groups want BC to enact legislation to protect the 1,900 species at risk in this province. It's a good law that's already in place in all other parts of the country, except Alberta.
We need to have some habitat set aside for rattlesnakes. We need to have some habitat set aside for badgers. And if we do that, we'll have badgers and rattlesnakes and bluebirds in our future. But if we don't, we're going to start to lose those species.
11-year-old Lise Revere is so passionate about BC's endangered species that she spent the last 5 months gathering 800 signatures to save them.
For a little girl, Elise, to go knocking on her neighbor's door, to go to the dog park, to collect signatures. So impressed.
The campaign was started by the Wilderness Committee. Their goal, to convince the provincial government to enact endangered species legislation, something every province in Canada has, except BC and Alberta.
We don't have anything in the province that properly protects habitat. 84% of species that are at risk in BC are at risk because of loss and degradation of their habitat. So I'm happy to work with this committee, and it's just a small token of our appreciation for the amazing work that we've done on behalf of BC's endangered species.
Elise would love to see all species saved, including her personal favorite, the often maligned badger.
I look at the American badger a lot. I don't know why, but I think it's a nice animal.
Gwen continued to paddle run-of-river private projects, and along the way became one of the top people in the province for discovering information that government didn't want us to know.
Opponents are reluctant to reduce revenues. That's so telling.
3,000 pages of documents obtained by Freedom of Information requests. The Wilderness Committee says it now has proof from the government's own experts that run-of-river hydro projects on the lower Mamquam and Ashley Creek near Squamish are killing fish.
With private power projects, the flows could increase and they can decrease. And what was happening on a repeated basis is that fish, including salmon, including steelhead, including gold trout, were getting stranded and were dying. And it wasn't one incident, or two, or three, it was scores of incidents. The government needs to make sure that these companies are operating within the law, that they aren't killing and stranding fish. And if they can't operate within the law, then they need to be shut down. I've been working on parks for the last, pretty much since I've been at the Wilderness Committee since 2001. So what's happening to park rangers, what's happening to interpretive programs, what's happening to funding for BC parks, and what the repercussions of that are. And so over the last couple of years, we really did a push for the 100-year anniversary for BC parks because we knew there'd be more media attention. And so I had heard persistent rumors about 2 years ago that park rangers weren't having access to vehicles, that the vehicles being taken back. So I did a Freedom of Information request based on what I had heard. And luckily it came back right before the 100-year anniversary, which was good timing. And what it showed that there had been a big appetite in BC parks in 2009. I know more rangers, part-time rangers were let go. We're down to just 11 full-time permanent park rangers year-round, and I got that from the government's own records. They looked at it, so I had to FOI it.
The Northern Gateway Pipeline Project are heading to court. They argue the federal government is withholding information on species at risk, information that could be a setback for the pipeline proposal.
I truly believe that they're sitting on someone's desk in Ottawa, and there's some political interference that's holding these recovery strategies back.
Of course, Gwen wasn't always in the field or answering reporters' questions. She also helped to run the Wilderness Committee, helped to produce our publications, and it was always there to answer questions, to mentor, or just be a friend. But then it was time to get out there again, this time to defend BC's provincial parks from being gutted by heavy industry.
As far as petitions go, this one's pretty big. Over 160,000 people have signed it to protest a new law that for the first time allows industrial research to take place in provincial parks.
If they care about parks, they should repeal the Park Amendment Act right now.
And then the Mount Poly open pit mine spilled its guts.
Tennessee, where there's some estimates that came out there. Tennessee, I believe, would be like $600 million and $800 million. That's huge. And is it going to be the public that's left on the hook for the cleanup costs?
The government says if Imperial Metals has made mistakes, it will be up to the company to pay for the cleanup, not the taxpayer. If the company doesn't comply, it could face fines up to $1 million.
After a dam of mine was flourished in Hungary 4 years ago, the company was hit with more than $500 million in fines. And so I think some of the numbers that have been kicked around in British Columbia, they're talking about $1 million fine to the company, and that just simply doesn't seem adequate.
Now, experts have warned over and over again that many different species are quickly becoming endangered or extinct. But a new study has found extinction rates are drastically higher than we first thought. And as different global reports, scientists say those rates are being expedited by us. And BC isn't immune to the problem.
In BC, environmental groups and scientists have been sounding the alarm for years.
Most people are astounded to find out in British Columbia that we have 1,900 species at risk, all the way from plants like phantom orchids to killer whales.
And she adds, we live in a province that has no endangered species law. Deborah Gold, CBC News, Vancouver.
Gwen never, ever gave up. She continued to fight for her beloved South Okanagan.
Hi, I'm Gwen Barlee, and I'm the Policy Director with the Wilderness Committee. Right now, we have an amazing opportunity to create a national park in the South Okanagan-Similkameen. Wilderness Committee has been working on this campaign, and I've been working on this campaign for over 12 years. Right now, the BC government is asking for your opinion on whether a national park should be established in the South Okanagan-Similkameen. It is a wonderful opportunity, and you have until October 31st to make your voice heard.
In the late spring of 2016, Gwen discovered that there had been logging in spotted owl habitat in the Lillooet Valley, so naturally, she had to head up and check it out.
Hi, I'm Gwen Barlee, and I'm the National Policy Director with the Wilderness Committee. Today I'm standing here in the Lillooet Valley in the middle of spotted owl habitat, or I should say former spotted owl habitat. And now obviously this habitat won't support any spotted owls for decades to come. In BC we're down to just 12 spotted owls in the wild, and that's the only place they're found in all of Canada. 100 years ago we had about 1,000 spotted owls in the wild, but because of ongoing logging and destruction of their habitat, that's why we're down to just a little over a handful. Many other species also face the same fate as the spotted owl. BC astoundingly has 1,900 species at risk. And we live in a province with no endangered species legislation. And so the Wilderness Committee is calling on the BC government to do the right thing for the spotted owl and for the 1,900 other species that are at risk in British Columbia. Please introduce endangered species legislation. It's the right thing to do.
To protect the wild things, to protect the province and the people she so dearly loved. Through Gwen's hard work and vision, British Columbia and Canada is a better place. Our wildlife, our wilderness, our wild rivers and parks are in a better condition because of Gwen Barlee's efforts. And her vision, her example, sets the path for all of us to that better future she envisioned.